In a quiet neighborhood, there stood an old, creaky house. Its paint was peeling, and the windows were always slightly ajar, as if they were eyes that watched the world with a hidden intent. The house had been there for as long as anyone could remember, and it was said that no one ever stayed there for long. The basement of this house was the most feared part of all. It was dark, damp, and cold, with a thick wooden door that groaned on its hinges whenever it was opened. The locals whispered that strange noises could be heard coming from the basement at night, scratching sounds, faint whispers, and an occasional thud that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who passed by. One day, a man named David moved into the house. He was a skeptic, a man who didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. He laughed off the warnings of his neighbors, dismissing them as silly superstitions. But the basement intrigued him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was down there, something that was calling to him. Late one night, David decided to explore the basement. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, he descended the narrow, creaking stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint smell of mildew filled his nostrils. The walls seemed to close in on him as he reached the bottom, where the darkness was thick and suffocating. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing old, cobweb-covered furniture, broken tools, and piles of forgotten junk. But as he moved further into the basement, the light flickered, and the temperature dropped even further. The scratching sounds began, faint at first, then louder, coming from the far corner of the room. David's heart raced, but he forced himself to move toward the noise. As he approached, he noticed a small door, almost hidden behind a pile of debris. It was old and rotting, with deep scratches etched into the wood. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a small, pitch-black room. The air inside was stale, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. David shone his flashlight inside, but the light seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. Suddenly, he felt a cold, clammy hand on his shoulder. He whipped around, but there was nothing there. Panic set in, and David stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The light went out, plunging him into total darkness. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and the whispers began, surrounding him from all sides. He fumbled for the flashlight, but his fingers were numb, and he could barely move. A low, guttural growl echoed through the basement, followed by a loud thud. David's breath caught in his throat as he felt something brush against his leg. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. He bolted for the stairs, but the door slammed shut, trapping him inside. The whispers turned to screams, and the scratching became deafening. The growl grew closer, more menacing, and David could feel the presence of something ancient and malevolent. He banged on the door, screaming for help, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. In the morning, the neighbors noticed that the old house was eerily quiet. The man who had moved in was nowhere to be found, and the basement door was sealed shut. No one dared to open it, and the house remained vacant, as it always had. The old house still stands, and the basement is still there, waiting. Some say that if you listen closely at night, you can still hear the scratching and the whispers. But no one ever goes near the basement, for fear of what might be lurking in the dark, waiting for its next victim. Mia had always been an adventurous child, fascinated by the old, the forgotten, and the mysterious. When her family moved into the big, old house on the edge of town, She was thrilled. The house was full of hidden nooks, dusty attics, and most exciting of all, a basement that had been locked for years. No one knew what was in the basement. The previous owners had passed away decades ago, leaving the house and its secrets untouched. The real estate agent had mentioned the basement in passing, saying it was just old storage. But something about the way he quickly changed the subject made Mia even more curious. One rainy afternoon, when her parents were out shopping, Mia found the key to the basement. It was tucked away in a drawer, rusty and cold to the touch. Her heart raced with excitement as she held it in her hand. Without a second thought, she made her way to the basement door, her footsteps echoing in the silent house. The key turned with a loud click, and the door creaked open, releasing a musty smell of damp wood and old memories. Mia hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity pushed her forward. She flicked on her flashlight and descended the narrow spiral staircase into the basement. The basement was larger than she had imagined, with low ceilings and walls lined with shelves filled with old boxes and forgotten trinkets. The air was heavy and still, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Mia wandered through the maze of boxes, her flashlight revealing glimpses of old photographs, yellowed papers, and strange objects she couldn't quite identify. As she ventured deeper into the basement, something caught her eye. In the far corner, almost hidden beneath a dusty sheet, was an old toy chest. It was ornate, with faded gold detailing and a small brass lock. The lock was open, the lid slightly ajar. Mia knelt down and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, she found a collection of old toys, wooden dolls with painted faces, tin soldiers with chipped paint, and a stuffed bear with button eyes. But one toy stood out among the rest, a small porcelain doll with glassy blue eyes and a delicate lace dress. The doll was pristine, almost as if it had been placed there recently. Mia picked up the doll, feeling a strange chill as she did. The doll was heavier than she expected, its eyes eerily lifelike. She turned it over in her hands, noticing a small keyhole in its back. Intrigued, she searched the toy chest and found a tiny brass key buried beneath the other toys. With a sense of unease creeping over her, Mia inserted the key into the doll's back and turned it. There was a soft click, and the doll's eyes blinked. Mia gasped and nearly dropped it as the doll's head slowly turned to face her, its lips curling into a smile. Suddenly, the basement grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and move. The doll's smile widened, and its eyes locked onto Mia's, unblinking. Then, in a voice that was not quite human, the doll spoke. "Come play with me, Mia." Mia's blood ran cold. She hadn't told anyone her name. The doll's voice was high-pitched, almost childlike, but there was something dark and ancient beneath it. Something that didn't belong in the world of the living. Terrified, Mia dropped the doll and backed away. But as soon as the doll hit the ground, it began to move on its own. It stood up slowly, its glassy eyes still fixed on Mia, and started to walk toward her, its tiny feet tapping on the cold stone floor. "Don't leave me alone, Mia," the doll whispered. "I've been waiting for so long." Mia turned and ran, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the doll's footsteps behind her, faster now, echoing through the basement. She raced up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind her and locking it tight. Breathless and shaking, Mia backed away from the door, listening. The house was silent, the only sound her own rapid breathing. For a moment, she thought it was over, but then she heard it, a faint tapping on the basement door. followed by the soft, chilling voice of the doll. "Come play with me, Mia. I'll be waiting." From that day on, Mia never went near the basement again. But every night, she could hear the faint tapping from below, a reminder that the doll was still there, waiting, and that one day it might find a way out.